The rain beat down hard on the windshield, a steady pulse that blurred the lines of the dark road ahead. Detective Evelyn Hart gripped the steering wheel tighter as she squinted into the night, her mind racing faster than her old sedan. She was no stranger to late-night calls, but this one had an edge to it, something that made her gut churn. Abandoned mansion at the edge of town, her boss had said. Something's off. You'll want to check it out. Evelyn had taken the call begrudgingly. She'd spent years on the force and had seen more than her fair share of crime scenes, gritty city corners, run-down motels, broken homes. But a mansion? In this sleepy, decaying town? That wasn't something she expected. The house appeared suddenly out of the fog, looming in the distance like a specter, its silhouette jagged against the stormy sky. Evelyn slowed the car as she neared the driveway. The gates hung open, rusted and creaking in the wind. She drove through and parked under a canopy of twisted trees. Shutting off the engine, she sat in silence for a moment, listening to the rain patter on the roof of the car. She wasn't alone here. She could feel it. Her flashlight flickered as she stepped out into the rain, casting a narrow beam of light across the overgrown path. The mansion ahead was massive, an old Victorian structure with peeling paint, broken windows, and ivy creeping up its sides. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone, or something, had left it that way. She approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. Her boots squelched against the muddy ground as she crossed the threshold, flashlight sweeping through the entrance hall. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only by the occasional gust of wind blowing through the shattered windows. The grand staircase stood at the center, leading up into darkness. Portraits of grim-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes following her as she moved. Evelyn paused at the base of the stairs, feeling the weight of the place pressing down on her. There was an eerie stillness in the air, as if time had stopped here long ago. She was about to turn back when she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible above the howling wind. She froze, every nerve on edge. The sound had come from upstairs. Taking a deep breath, she ascended the staircase, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. The air grew colder as she reached the second floor, the shadows deeper and more oppressive. She moved cautiously down the hall, stopping outside a door that was slightly ajar. The whispering grew louder. Pushing the door open, Evelyn shone her flashlight into the room. It was a bedroom, long abandoned, with tattered curtains fluttering in the breeze from the broken window. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, its canopy torn and hanging in shreds. But it wasn't the state of the room that made her blood run cold, it was the figure standing at the window. A man, tall and gaunt, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, stood with his back to her, staring out into the storm. His shoulders were hunched, and his hands were clasped behind his back. He hadn't noticed her. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, her voice firm despite the chill creeping down her spine. "Who are you?" The man didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. Evelyn took a step forward, her hand hovering near her sidearm. "I asked you a question." The man slowly turned, his movements unnaturally smooth, as if he were gliding. His face was pale, his eyes hollow and dark, like twin abysses that threatened to swallow her whole. But it wasn't his appearance that terrified her, it was the way he smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that sent a shiver of dread through her. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and raspy, like dead leaves scraping against stone. Evelyn's breath hitched in her throat. "What do you mean?" The man took a step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "This place is cursed. It doesn't let anyone leave." Before she could react, the man vanished, faded into the air as if he had never been there. Evelyn blinked, her heart racing, but the room was empty, save for the sound of the wind howling through the broken window. She stumbled back out into the hallway, her mind reeling. She had seen strange things before, things she couldn't explain, but this was different. Something was terribly wrong with this place. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the mansion, shaking the floor beneath her. It had come from downstairs. Evelyn rushed back down the staircase, her flashlight beam darting through the darkness. She skidded to a halt at the base of the stairs, her heart in her throat. The front door was now wide open, and standing just inside was a woman, drenched from the rain. Her hair clung to her face, her clothes soaked through, but her eyes, those wide, terrified eyes, were fixed on Evelyn. "Help me," the woman gasped. "Please, you have to help me." Evelyn approached cautiously, noting the woman's shaking hands and the wild look in her eyes. "What's going on? What are you doing here?" The woman's breath came in ragged gasps. I've been trapped here for days. The house. It's alive. It won't let me leave." Evelyn frowned, glancing around. "What do you mean, alive?" "There's something inside." The woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something evil." Before Evelyn could ask more, the front door slammed shut behind the woman, the sound reverberating through the mansion. Both women jumped, their eyes darting to the door. The room seemed to grow darker, the air heavier with each passing second. "I tried to leave," the woman whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But it won't let us. It won't let anyone." Evelyn's mind raced. She had come here expecting a routine investigation, but now she was faced with something far beyond her understanding. She needed answers, fast. "Tell me everything," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "From the beginning." The woman, still trembling, took a deep breath. "My name is Sarah. I was just passing through town when my car broke down near here. I thought I could find help at the mansion, but when I came inside, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake." Evelyn nodded for her to continue. "There's something in the walls, something that watches. I've seen shadows moving when there shouldn't be any, heard voices that don't belong to anyone. And the man. The man upstairs." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "You've seen him too?" Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "He told me the same thing he told you. That no one can leave." Evelyn's mind spun as she tried to piece together the puzzle. There was clearly something supernatural at work here, something far beyond her usual cases. But she wasn't about to give up. "There had to be a way out of this. We're getting out of here," Evelyn said firmly. "Together." Sarah nodded, though doubt flickered in her eyes. The two women moved through the darkened halls, their footsteps eerily silent on the creaking floorboards. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every whisper louder. Evelyn felt the weight of unseen eyes on her. The sense that the house itself was watching, waiting. As they approached the front door, a low groan echoed through the walls, followed by a series of loud, violent thumps. The mansion shuddered, the floors trembling beneath them. "We have to move," Evelyn urged, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her toward the door, but as they reached the threshold, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Evelyn grabbed the handle, pulling with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself had locked them in. "What do we do?" Sarah cried, panic rising in her voice. Evelyn turned, scanning the room for another exit. But as her eyes swept over the walls, something caught her attention, a glimmer of movement in the far corner of the room. She swung her flashlight toward it, and her blood turned to ice. A figure stood there, half-shrouded in shadow. It was the man again, his hollow eyes fixed on them. But this time, he wasn't alone. Dark, writhing shapes twisted behind him, figures too vague to make out but undeniably human. They whispered in the dark, their voices low and hungry. "This is their domain," the man rasped, stepping forward. "And you've already lost." Before Evelyn could react, the walls began to pulse, the wood groaning as if it were alive. The shadows grew, slithering across the floor toward them like snakes. "We have to run," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "Now." The two women bolted, racing through the dark halls as the mansion twisted around them. Doors slammed, windows shattered, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath their feet. The shadows were relentless, chasing them through the labyrinthine corridors. Just as they reached the back of the mansion, Evelyn spotted a narrow staircase leading down to the basement. It was a long shot, but it was their only option. She grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her down the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. The basement was a maze of old, decaying stone walls, cold and damp. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and earth, and Evelyn's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. She kept her grip tight on Sarah's hand, pulling her through the narrow passageways as the sounds from above grew fainter. Evelyn's mind raced. The house was changing, warping around them, as if it was alive. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Yet, the fear gnawing at her gut told her that this place was far more dangerous than she'd imagined. They had to find a way out before the house trapped them for good. As they rounded a corner, Evelyn's flashlight dimmed and sputtered out, plunging them into complete darkness. She cursed under her breath, fumbling with it, but it was no use. The batteries were dead. "I can't see anything," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. "Stay close," Evelyn muttered. "We'll find another way. There has to be a way out." They moved cautiously, their hands pressed to the cold stone walls as they felt their way through the blackness. The only sound was their ragged breathing and the occasional drip of water somewhere deep in the house. But then, from somewhere behind them, came a faint sound, a whisper. It was low, indistinct, but unmistakably there. Evelyn froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Did you hear that?" Sarah nodded, her grip tightening on Evelyn's arm. "It's coming closer." Panic surged through Evelyn's veins. They couldn't afford to stand still, not with whatever was pursuing them. She pulled Sarah forward, their pace quickening despite the darkness. The whispers grew louder, closer, until they were almost in her ear. Suddenly, Evelyn's foot caught on something, and she stumbled, dragging Sarah down with her. They hit the floor hard, the breath knocked from their lungs. Evelyn reached out, her fingers brushing against what felt like cold metal. It was a handle, a trapdoor. "Here," Evelyn gasped. "There's something here." She scrambled to her knees and wrenched the trapdoor open, revealing a narrow tunnel below. The smell of damp earth and rot wafted up, but it was their only option. Without a word, she helped Sarah down into the tunnel, then followed, pulling the door closed behind them. The tunnel was even darker than the basement, but it was also narrower, more confined. The walls pressed in on them as they crawled forward, the damp earth brushing against their skin. Evelyn's heart raced, her mind fighting to keep the rising panic at bay. They had to keep moving. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a small, earthen chamber. It was dimly lit by a single, flickering candle placed on the ground in the center of the room. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with old, dusty books and strange trinkets, things that looked far older than the mansion above. Evelyn stood, catching her breath as she scanned the room. "What is this place?" Sarah shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know. But it feels wrong." Evelyn approached the shelves, her fingers brushing over the spines of the ancient books. The titles were in languages she didn't recognize, the letters curling and twisting in ways that made her uneasy. One book, however, stood out. It was larger than the others, bound in cracked, black leather. The symbol on the cover was a strange, spiral-like design that seemed to draw her in. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the book. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but she could still make out the words. It was a journal, written in shaky, desperate handwriting. As she flipped through the pages, the story it told sent chills down her spine. The journal belonged to the original owner of the mansion, a man named Edmund Crowley. He had been a reclusive scholar, obsessed with the occult, and had built the mansion over what he believed was a place of power. But something had gone wrong. In his attempts to harness the power of the place, he had awoken something dark and ancient that now resided in the walls of the house. The journal ended abruptly, with a single, chilling line, "It is too late. The house is alive. And it will never let us leave." Evelyn slammed the book shut, her heart racing. This place. It's a prison. Sarah looked at her, eyes wide with terror. What do we do? How do we get out? Before Evelyn could answer, the walls of the chamber began to tremble. The flickering candlelight cast strange, shifting shadows on the walls, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. The house knew they were here. We can't stay, Evelyn said, grabbing Sarah's hand. We have to keep moving. They rushed back into the tunnel, the walls closing in around them as the house itself seemed to shift and groan. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them in a cacophony of voices, each one more desperate than the last. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up, and they found themselves in what appeared to be an old cellar. Crates and barrels lined the walls, and a rickety wooden staircase led up to a trapdoor in the ceiling. Evelyn's heart soared with hope. This could be their way out. She climbed the stairs first, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. The wood creaked ominously, but it held. When she reached the top, she pushed against the trapdoor. It groaned but didn't budge. Help me, Evelyn called down to Sarah, who quickly climbed up beside her. Together, they pushed against the door with all their strength. Slowly, it began to give, the wood splintering and creaking until, with one final shove, it burst open. Cool night air flooded in, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Evelyn breathed freely. They climbed out into the open air, collapsing on the wet grass. The rain had stopped, and the sky above was clear, dotted with stars. The mansion loomed behind them, dark and silent once more. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the reality of their escape sinking in. But as Evelyn looked back at the house, a shiver ran down her spine. The mansion was still there, watching, waiting. We made it, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Evelyn nodded, but her relief was tempered by a sense of unease. They had escaped, yes, but the house was still there, and whatever lived inside it wasn't done. She could feel it, a presence just beyond the edge of her perception, watching her. We need to go, Evelyn said, standing and helping Sarah to her feet. We can't stay near this place. They hurried back to Evelyn's car, which was still parked near the mansion's gate. As they drove away, the mansion faded into the darkness behind them, but Evelyn knew it would never truly leave her mind. The house had let them go, for now. As they drove down the empty road, Sarah broke the silence. Do you think anyone else will come here? Evelyn glanced in the rearview mirror, the image of the mansion growing smaller in the distance. I hope not. But if they do. She trailed off, her mind returning to the man in the window, to the whispers, and to the journal that had chronicled the house's dark past. If they do, she said finally, they may not be as lucky as we were. The rain began to fall again, gently tapping against the windshield as they disappeared into the night, leaving the haunted mansion, and its terrible secrets, behind. But deep within the house, in the darkened rooms and twisted hallways, the whispers never stopped. They would wait, patient and eternal, for the next soul to cross the threshold, to be ensnared by the curse that lingered within its walls, and when that time came, the house would welcome them home.